by reducing their consumption. They could also choose to smooth consumption and instead actually disinvest. That is, they could sell assets or they can put children out of school. There are a range of what we refer to as coping strategies that they could adopt and protect their consumption. Because this is a cash transfer targeted at the woman, there is also potential for backlash against women. So you can think of a scenario in which maybe the woman is blamed for the discontinuation, or because of the stress created by the decline in income as a result of the cash transfer stopping, there is some increase in violence against her, or other dimensions of empowerment are impacted. So I'll go through the study design next. As I said, this eligibility is based on a 14 means test. This was based on 23 indicators, which was calculated using microdata, which was a census conducted between 2010 and 12. And based on this eligibility, households received cash transfers for a good 10 years. The new microdata was collected around 2018 to 2020, and simultaneously, the BMT calculation was also updated. And so then, using the new BMT score, a new eligibility criterion was determined, and both with the initial one and in the new one, the cutoff was essentially determined by budgetary constraints. So there wasn't something deep there beyond, like the BMT of course was well researched, but the exact cutoff was just determined by how much money was available, and that's what determined the BMT cutoff. And as I said, once the BMT score was updated, it resulted in some households continuing to receive cash transfers and others being discontinued. And so we end up with a situation in which on the y-axis, I don't think I can use the pointer, but on the y-axis you have the old BMT, so the initial BMT which determined eligibility, and the horizontal line gives you the initial BMT1 cutoff which determined cash transfer eligibility and households receiving cash transfers for 10 years. So all these groups below that line have received cash transfers for 10 years. Then on the x-axis we have the new BMT, and now the vertical line essentially determines the new cutoff, so the new eligibility cutoff, and this then creates within the group of households below the horizontal line, so below the horizontal line, these are the group of households that we're interested in, who have received cash transfers for a long time, and now some are below the new cutoff, which means that they continue to be eligible, so they're the always eligible group, and there's some who've just fallen above the new cutoff, and they're now the newly ineligible group, and we're interested in comparing these two groups. And so the assumption for identification is essentially that the differences between these two groups are quasi-random, and we're thinking of the treatment group as these newly eligible who stop receiving transfers, and the control or the comparison group are households who were always eligible and they continue to receive the transfer. So these are the set of households that we are essentially interested in. And what we do is, so what we do is that we baseline households before they receive news of this discontinuation of cash transfers or the updating of the eligibility criterion at the end of 2021, early 2022, and we surveyed around a 3.5 bandwidth of this new eligibility criterion within the group who had received cash transfers for the last 10 years. We have a sample of about 2,500 women in the district, and we verified that about 72% of the households expected to continue receiving transfers in the future. This is not different by those who are eventually discontinued or not. So generally, news having spread at that point that cash transfers may be discontinued. Then we
predict the likelihood of receiving the cash transfer. This is based on them saying whether they received cash transfers in the last 6 months or not at the follow-up. We also do the standard test of whether the PMT is smoothly distributed at the new cutoff, and we can PMT value 2.56, so we don't think that there's any reason to be worried about manipulation around the cutoff, the new cutoff. Okay? So now turning towards our empirical strategy. So we have an RDP differences approach here because we have a baseline for the same set of households. And what we do is we run a regression where we include the new PMT score, which is PMT2 based on the household in the administrative data. Then we have a PMT2 above cutoff dummy, which is an indicator for a household being above the new eligibility cutoff. Then we interact them. And then we also have a post dummy, which is an indicator for the follow-up survey round. And what we're interested in is beta 5, which is this last coefficient, which essentially tells you the effect of being above the new eligibility cutoff, that is newly eligible after the cutoff was implemented, compared to those below the new cutoff, that is those who were always eligible and who continue to receive the cash transfer. So beta 5 is what I'm going to show you in the regression tables from this point onward, and this essentially detects the effect of the discontinuation of the cash transfers on these households just below and above the new eligibility cutoff. And so here are the first set of results. What you're seeing here are the first and the 2-year results. So this is follow-up 1 and follow-up 2. We're showing you results on consumption, both on expenditures, locked expenditures, and on the value of food items. Because one of the first channels that you can think of when cash transfers stop is that they compromise consumption. What we find is that there isn't really any effect in the first year, whether you look at overall expenditures or food expenditures. But by year 2, there is a slight increase in expenditures overall and an insignificant negative effect on value of food items as well. So it seems like after 2 years, there's beginning to be some sign of a decline in consumption. We also look at household labor supply because they might work harder now that this input stream has died down. We also look at income excluding transfers and on the range of coping strategies, and we do not find any average effect in the first or the second year following the discontinuation. We also check for heterogeneity in these outcomes by a range of observable household and female empowerment-related characteristics, and we don't find any effect. The one dimension on which we do find heterogeneity is an interesting one, and I would love to hear everyone's thoughts on this. So at baseline, we actually asked all households whether they've ever received this payments late. And about 50% of the households did say that they received payments late, and there were also the households that said they received less amount of money than they were expecting. And when we look at heterogeneity by this particular dimension, we do see some interesting results, and namely that these people who have experienced late payments in the past, they're the ones actually who reduce their food and adopt a lot of, don't reduce food, and adopt a range of coping strategies such as, for example, stopping their children's education or not paying bills or selling productive assets. So the average effects seem to be masking this heterogeneity. It seems that some households are actually compromising on consumption, while others are adopting these coping strategies, potentially because they're used to delays in payments and not receiving the full amount, and so they go more towards coping strategies and protect their consumption, while others do not. But happy to hear more thoughts on this. Let me now move to women's empowerment-related outcomes. So we collected a range of outcomes to cover dimensions such as women's experience of intimate partner violence, their same household decision-making, as well as psychological well-being, and we do not find any effects at the first year mark on any of these dimensions. We didn't collect these in the second year because this was a phone survey and we didn't want to ask sensitive questions on the phone. One possible explanation for this is that 85% of the women, when we asked them, said they were not blamed for the discontinuation. We asked them, the group that hadn't received cash transfers for a good year now, we asked them, were you blamed? And they said we were not really blamed for the discontinuation. That might explain why a broad range of women's empowerment outcomes didn't see being impacted as a result of this cash transfer. One other dimension that we looked at, which is particular to this cash transfer program, and that is mobility. So previous work has shown that in the case of BIS, there's actually an increase in mobility of women, which means their ability to go alone to markets. And this is because BIS payments require biometric verification, and it's hypothesized that that meant that
there was no official communication from the government to these households. Once they didn't receive payments, they sort of tried to figure out what was going on. But because many others continued to receive cash transfers, and then many others who might have now started to receive cash transfers, because there will be households that just became eligible, there was a lot of uncertainty about their status. And that might be why we're not seeing initially at least average effects in terms of household economic outcomes. By second year, we're seeing some reduction in expenditures and a significant decline in women's mobility. And indeed, by the second year, there was a lot more clarity. 50% of them still don't know, but about 60% of them actually said that, these are not adding up for history, right? But a large majority of them now knew that their household is not eligible. So that might explain that word is spreading now, that this amount of money may never come back, and that's why we're starting to see effects. But all in all, we were a bit surprised by these results because we expected more of a negative effect to show up, at least in some dimension, especially consumption as a result of the discontinuation of a long-running cash transfer. But the effects were much more muted and less immediate than we would have expected. We have to, of course, remember that we're looking at a very small group just around the cutoff, but we think that they're very comparable, and 10 to 15% of their income sources disappeared, and we're not really seeing any clear effects on average in terms of their consumption patterns. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, for a very interesting presentation. Can I now request Dr. Jonathan to give his feedback?
Well, this was a real pleasure to engage with the paper. It's a really nice paper, and there's a lot going on in it, as you see. It's really, I hope you all have a chance to spend some time with it. The paper's really good. I wanted to provide some comments which are really more about making some connections to the literature and sort of a few thoughts about how the strands connect. The paper has some straightforward findings which, as Maureen was saying, are a little bit complicated to interpret. And so in that spirit, I want to lay out a few thoughts. The motivation for the paper, as Maureen began, is that cash transfers sometimes stop. And that's an important moment in the life of households. It can be devastating for some households. It could just be a natural thing for other households. We're really trying to understand this is important. But I want to come back to how to think about different scenarios that really, some connect better and some connect worse, I think, to this set of findings. This RD is really nice because the other papers using this RD, but it really does seem like the rules are followed, and that really opens up these possibilities. It's really creative to look at that and look at changing rules. So very nice methodologically. And this result that by year 2 there's a 6% reduction in consumption is interesting. We can, I think, pull that apart a little bit. And I want to come back to this point that Marie asked us to think about, which is why would it be that households that had missed payments, delayed payments, and had not had a steady flow, why were they not seeing the kind of consumption drops that households that have been receiving steady flows of transfers experience? So it's a bit of a puzzle, and here are my 3 thoughts. The first thought is that, as Maureen said, there are different scenarios in which programs end. One is individual. I am no longer eligible, but everyone around me is still eligible, but something in my circumstances changed. That's very different from I'm no longer eligible because the program has stopped entirely, or it stopped entirely in my region. And I think that's an important distinction. I want to just make the connection to a little bit of the literature where we're seeing that cash transfer programs broadly have big ones like this one, have big general equilibrium effects. Big effects on prices, big effects on local economic activity. I don't know how that applies here exactly, but we do know from other literature on cash transfers that there's a big distinction between an individual impact versus a broader impact. Another broad, just simple comment. I'm going to get to that other lecture in a moment, but is that I would really love to have a sense of magnitudes. There's a 6% reduction in people's consumption. It would be nice to go back through the paper and say, well, first, how big is the scale of the program? It seems really big. $787 US, 35,000 Pakistan rupees. It's giving some sense of these magnitudes, not just in percentage terms, but in absolute terms. Is that 6% on the same scale as the reduction in transfers over time? That could be an important story there. And the third thing I'm going to get to in a moment is that, and this is very speculative, and you invited us to speculate, but the speculative thought is if you're getting delayed payments, that means your payments are piling up on each other. And those payments, instead of being steady, then are more likely to be sort of lumpy. And we know from other cash transfer programs that getting lumpy payments, lumpy transfers, rather than steady flows, profoundly affects the impacts and uses of the transfers. And I wonder if something like that's happening. So let me get there. One of the key insights, I think, that's often lost about cash transfers is that they're not just extra income. They also serve, depending on how they're designed, as financial substitutes. So if you're getting this money, not only are you getting this money, but it means perhaps you don't have to save as much. It's a saving substitute. Or maybe you don't have to borrow, it's a borrowing substitute. If it's lumpier, it can really act as a borrowing or saving substitute. And so there may be a key distinction there in how these are playing out. So really, this is something we've seen, especially in Kenya, that steady transfers are really act more like income, and lumpy transfers act more like a loan or saving. So the first paper to connect this to is a really beautiful paper in Econometrica. Dennis Egger, Johannes Haushofer, Ted Miguel, Paul Niehaus, and Ray Walker, which looks at the Give Directly cash transfer program in Kenya. I know you know this paper. It's really nice because they're randomizing the extent to which entire villages are getting money. And it allows them to look at general equilibrium effects by comparing villages that got a lot of concentrated money versus not. And what they find, and you can't read this, but is very strong general equilibrium effects. That the villages that got more concentrated resources, you see not only recipients doing better, but the entire village doing better. You see that in terms of consumption, wages, etc. So the literature is telling us we have to pay attention to this. Another nice paper that connects is by Emily Reza and Cynthia Kinnan. This is a microfinance paper. We've all been told that microfinance doesn't have a big impact on people's lives, businesses. But they went back to Andhra Pradesh in India and looked at the data after microfinance was banned in September 2010 in Andhra Pradesh, and they saw what happened. And again, they see big general equilibrium effects. It's not what's happening to individuals, but the entire sort of economy started doing better. And for example, after microfinance was pulled out, wages fell as a general, more broad effect. And so, getting to the framing of the paper, it's a very good story, depending on how to plot it. The last connection I want to make is to a paper that I haven't seen really even in a working paper form, or a kind of early working paper, which is a paper by a group of researchers, including W. Suri and Abhijit Banerjee. You know this paper on the short run effects of a long-term cash transfer program. It relates here in a few ways. One, it shows, you do a number of comparisons, but one is they show that a long-term program like the one that you're looking at this can be very powerful, and thus stopping it as you're losing access to it can also be very powerful. So it kind of motivates this project. We're running a cash transfer program in Los Angeles. This lasted 2 years, didn't really make much impact, and it's partly because it wasn't designed like this. And so you have a really nice place to work. But the other thing coming up from this study and other studies is that the studies where people got lumpy transfers, one big amount of money, rather than a steady flow, are the places where the impacts were greatest and most lasting. And we've seen that in long-run follow-ups, in other studies by Johannes Haushofer, Jeremy Shapiro, which kind of suggests that maybe this alternative view of what's happening with the delayed payment group, maybe there is something to that it's sort of acting like a larger itself. So those are my thoughts. We can talk a little bit later about some of the other results. Thank you for the paper and just the
Thank you, Dr. Jonathan, for your insights. I think we should then take questions first, and then do we have any questions here?
So my question is to interact. So the two results that really struck me were this: people who were used to delayed payments were different, and that no one believed these are actually stopping. So is the people who were used to lumpy payments think, oh, it's just another time when they're temporarily stopping my payment, and I'm going to get more here.
Thanks, Marie. Super cool paper. I'm jealous of that information as well. I think a very small point, but obviously you have larger attrition in the second follow-up survey, the phone survey, and most of your results are also in the follow-up survey, what I gather. So I'm just wondering if you've tested whether there is systematic attrition with regards to baseline characteristics, just for kind of the external validity of your follow-up survey. I know it's a name treatment anyway, but external, and if you want to do inverse probability weighting or something like that, if they are systematically different. And then I think I saw somewhere it said psychological well-being. So did you have measures of mental health as well, and you found no effect on those? It's interesting. A colleague of mine at the studies is working on a paper on child support grants in South Africa, where they stop receiving after they are no longer eligible based on age, and finds large negative effects on mental health. So I'll tell her to reference your paper as well.
Any other questions?
Hi, really nice paper. I was just like curious that we have some like anecdotal information about that BEST now, because it's connecting more towards like Easy Pesa and platforms like that. The shopkeepers, where they buy from, they buy on credit and they waive it off after they receive the payment. Do you think that's one of the reasons why it didn't have any impact? Because they were really like the lenders knew when the payment was coming, so they never really stopped giving them anything they wanted, which is one of the reasons why these payments are usually used for.
Just curious, in the sense that I want to ask, the objective of ASP, of course, is a support program, but also through it may be some people are better off at the end of it, and they've been saving for a long period. And therefore, since this was just a different line affecting some people, they became ineligible, but this was because they scored better on that new rating. This is based on the data collected subsequently on the score, right? The 22 cutoff was based on the first survey, and this was based on the second survey. So this, which may have improved over time. And therefore, in that sense, going back to what Jonathan was saying earlier in the plenary talk, is that maybe the vulnerability had been decreased over so many years of receiving it, and therefore, in that sense, it may not be surprising. It would not be that this is the benefit they got, but rather this is the benefit, this is the loss that it after having received it for 8 years or 6, 7 years or whatever.
Any other questions? I have one question, but this is just out of curiosity. I'm sure you've done this, but you were talking about mobility of the I didn't see anything on the paper post participation to check if cash
I'll just take the comments in order. So Adrian's comment, well, no, actually. So we thought that those who have experienced delays in the past will be the ones who will also think that it's discontinued for an unknown reason. And we don't actually see this. And maybe let me take a minute to explain so far what we understand about this delayed group. This is also a group that actually says we receive less amount on average than what is the base payment. And so what we think, and some of the authors on the paper have another paper on this, and we think that there's some leakage happening. So we have admin data, and the transfers are actually arriving on time, and it's actually, from what we don't have evidence on it, but from their work, that there is some corruption happening at the agent end in these. And these are, so I didn't have time to show the descriptives, but these are poorer households, and they're less literate, and overall empowerment levels of these women are lower. And we think that's what's happening, that there's some extraction happening there, and that's why they're receiving. And so in that sense, it's not so much that they get lumpy payments, it's just that they get lesser amount, and that is why maybe they're more used to coping with it in a certain way. So that's so far what we understand of this group. To Richard's question, we did test the systematic nutrition, we don't find evidence. We also restricted the 1-year sample to the same sample as the 2-year and checked, and the results held up. And I would love to get the reference for your colleagues' work. Where they did see effects on mental health, we did use the validated scales, we didn't see anything. And I think we also asked about life satisfaction and so on. Didn't see any effects which we were expecting. In terms of your comment on Easy Pesa and being able to buy things on credit, we actually tested for this directly. It's also important to remember that a year has passed, so it's not like they're going to extend credit for so long, but we explicitly asked about this and didn't find any evidence of this. Dr. Navid, your point, I completely agree. I think part of what is going on is that we are looking at a very select group who, in some sense, maybe are doing well enough now that they're not as impacted. But it's also worth remembering that it's still about 12%, at least of their reported income. So it's not negligible, which is why it's surprising that we're not seeing as much of a negative effect on outcomes as we would have expected. But we think part of the story was exactly with this. And finally, we have a table of people because participation, I didn't find anything. So we've looked at, it's a long question here, we've looked at what we thought was a comprehensive set of outcomes that we could have expected both in the household and at the primary female level. I haven't seen a lot of movement, at least in the time frame that we followed that. No, so we looked at the main labor force participation because that's one coping strategy, right? That they could be pushed into the labor market because they're no longer seeing, and we didn't see it. Thank you everyone for your comments.
Thank you, Megan. Can we now have the speaker, Dr. Sandra?
Good afternoon. Everyone, I am pleased to present the Assalamualaikum, good afternoon. Everyone, I am pleased to present our study on the impact of asset transfer within the National Poverty Alleviation Program in Pakistan. Our work titled The Power of Assets, a catalyst for multi-dimensional well-being explored how these assets drive both economic and social benefit, particularly in households already receiving long-term consumption support. We know that asset transfers often come with which intervention can have sustained effects on poverty alleviation. However, existing research often overlooks contexts where beneficiaries already receive long-term consumption support. This gap motivates us to investigate the additional impact of asset transfer under National Poverty Alleviation Program, particularly when basic consumption needs are already met through ongoing support like the basic income support program. Our target group is these beneficiaries, those receive untraditional cash transfers since 2010. As Dr. Karin also already explained in these beneficiaries and the eligibility criteria based on the PMC. This that is strong consumption score enables them to meet the basic consumption requirement. The questions we are interested in: what are the additional effects of asset transfer on beneficiary already receiving cash scores? So our primary objective is to investigate the short-term impact of asset transfer under the NPGPR contract characterized by a long-standing provision of unconditional consumption score to eligible household through the WISCO. NPGP is one of the largest state-led asset transfer program implemented in Pakistan. The program aims to assist the ultra-poor and very poor in graduating out of poverty on a sustainable basis, while simultaneously improving their overall food security, nutritional status, and resilience to climate change. On average, the value of the asset transfer package is on about $500. Before discussing the data, let me explain NPGP targeting process. All which beneficiaries are eligible. For cross-validation, NPGP conduct a survey for calculate poverty scorecard that consists of 23 indicators, and based on the poverty scorecard, NPGP offered asset transfer to those whose score is less than equal to 16.17. Using poverty scorecard score, we draw a sample of 4,131 households in which 2,277 is the treatment group and the 1,854 is the control group. To ensure comparability between the treatment and control group, draw a sample using a quick Damiso file as follows. And the further we use the various data sets such as administrative data including baseline, targeting survey, asset transfer, profiling, and SCR 2020 census to capture which level pre-treatment factor using MOSA census 2020. We use a parametric regression distributed design to assess the impact of NPGP on various welfare indicators. This strategy provides robust estimate of the causal impact of the NPGP intervention on welfare indicator, addressing potential immunity and selection bias using through the cross of the RD framework. We specify the following model. Here Y is the outcome variable that measures welfare measures, and T is the treatment variable, and the PSC is the poverty scorecard, and then the fixed FV denote the fixed effect of the district level, and Z is the vector of the MOSA statistic covariate variable. So first we establish the validity of the proposed methodology. Left-hand side graphs confirm the program's perfect compliance, means there is a perfect discontinuity. And whereas we rule out the possibility of manipulation at cutoff using histogram. Furthermore, the Catino test also confirms the absence of manipulation. Lastly, we confirm the predetermined characteristic in which the table shows the balance table, which is all the variables are insignificant. Now we move to the main findings of this study. Our findings reveal that the asset transfer significantly improved the poverty scorecard growth rate. The well-being of the individual in the treatment group increased by approximately 1.139 units more than those in the control group. Moreover, these was a noticeable increase in per capita consumption, particularly in food and utility expenditure, which directly improved the quality of life. And the other one is the food security index. Food security index also asset transfer marginally increased the food security as well. To understand the mechanism that was significant improvement in poverty scorecard, we explore the different pathways. So the first pathway, we examine the impact of program on livestock. First, then asset transfer had a positive impact on livestock ownership, particularly small animals like goats and sheep. Beneficiary of asset transfer show a 35 percentage point higher probability of possessing livestock compared to the control group. Furthermore, beneficiary of asset transfer with a 37 percentage point higher likelihood of possessing small animal compared to the control group. However, the program does not appear to have an impact on the short-term ownership of large animals, for example, draft animals and the birds. Household also reported increased ownership of durable assets such as motorcycle, washing machine, and mobile phone, which are crucial for economic mobility and improving life standard. And this, the beneficiary also found to have a 13% point higher likelihood of the owning rickshaw compared to non-beneficiaries. And also beneficiaries are found to have a 27 point higher likelihood of ownership of durable asset index compared to the non-beneficiaries. If we see the panel B, which show the impact of program on housing condition, then the intervention has a statistically significant impact on the ownership of household appliances such as refrigerators and heaters. This slide shows the effects of asset transfer on financial soundness. Interesting, the program also fostered better financial behavior with a slight increase in saving behavior and reduced reliance on borrowing. This slide shows the effect of asset transfer on financial soundness. Interest. On the social side, we observe a positive impact on the social trust and community satisfaction, though political engagement saw a slight decline. These outcomes underscore the multifaceted benefits of asset transfer going beyond mere economic gains. We use multiple indicators of the women empowerment also, but we have inseen impact of women empowerment. I think it's because this program have already positive impact of women empowerment, and the alternative program may show the insignificant impact of because the program may not enhance empowerment outcome in this context. So if we conclude, our study demonstrates that asset transfer under national poverty graduation program significantly enhance both economic well-being and social integration among marginalized population, and these findings suggest that a similar program could be instrumental in promoting financial inclusion and reducing poverty on a larger scale. In light of these results, we recommended scaling up such asset transfer program with tailored design to meet the specific need of different population. Further, future research also focus on long-term impact and potential synergy with other poverty alleviation interventions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Sandra. Many, and we now have your comments.
So this study, let me begin with a summary, looks at the impact on household outcomes and welfare of a national asset transfer program. And so their key contribution, which I'll talk a bit more about later in my comments as well, the way that they've argued at the minute, is what is the impact of an asset transfer to poor households who are already receiving consumption support. The key strength is that they have a fairly clean identification strategy and they have a sizable sample size to look at this. So that's great. What I would really recommend, and I think reading through the paper, what I felt would really benefit the paper is to think about a brief conceptual framework, like what is it that we really expect the program to do, and thinking particularly about how is this different from standard bundle graduation programs that have been evaluated throughout the world. So really, in terms of the marginal contribution of this paper, it's really great, it's clear identifications looking at a bundle program, but if you're pushing what we understand about graduation programs and want to make a contribution there, we need to think about, okay, what happens if households have been receiving this consumption support for a very long time, and then they're offered an asset transfer program and a whole bundle, as opposed to a lot of graduation programs that have consumption support coming as a part of that program. And so maybe some of the liabilities when you want to go along is that if they already reached a certain level of consumption security, used for different components of the program, or it is a bundled program. Either is fine, but I think in terms of, again, how you want to argue about, you know, related to this, I was also a bit surprised by just how perfect the compliance is. I don't know if this is a function of how you drew the sample, but I think definitely should discuss this more because it raises sometimes too perfect compliance can also be a bit of a problem because there are bound to be some leakages if given that it's a national program. So I think it would really help to clarify the exact nature of the intervention and the theory of change. I then have some specific questions on trying to understand the results. So it's quite a dramatic increase in consumption, and it would be helpful to understand how this is coming about. There is not really a discussion, I couldn't at least find a discussion on income in the paper, so it's difficult to understand why we're seeing these consumption gains. Is it the value of food that they're purchasing is going up, or are they eating more of their own food, not having to sell it? So a bit more discussion on this, I think, would really help the reader. The second part of the results are about assets. There also I was a bit puzzled because 70% of the asset transfers were buffalo cows. You have a nice figure in the paper that shows the breakdown of the assets that were actually transferred. And though the impact of that is noisy, the size is fine, the direction is in the right place, it's right. But did you directly ask about the status of the transferred asset? Do they still have it? Has it been sold off? And I think I would also look at carefully the coding of how you're looking at these large animals, because the control means look too high. Like if these are such poor households, how do 40% of the control group have a buffalo or a cow, which is a big asset, but then they only have 28% of them have a small animal and only 21% poultry. So I'm a bit worried about exactly what this large animal, you say that's cow or buffalo, but it seems a bit surprising that so many very, very poor households have cows and buffaloes, but not other animals. So we were just checking through this carefully. I would also recommend doing a few robustness checks, maybe showing results for smaller banquets. I think it would also help to do multiple hypothesis testing. So one of your results is that specific kinds of assets, which are particularly, if I remember correctly, there's a significant effect on that. But given that there's only one effect on one type of asset and not on others, I think it would really help to see correction for multiple hypothesis testing. And then finally, I wanted to link back to the contribution. Why would you expect effects to be different if consumption support is provided? You also argued in the paper that this is a real-world implementation by the government rather than an RCT, and you allude to this in the paper, and maybe you can expand this discussion a bit more, and again, link back to the intervention compliance. It seems almost 100%, because if anything, you'd expect a lot more leakage if it's not being tightly run in an RCT environment by an NGO. So I think that would really benefit the paper. I have a series of smaller comments that I'll just share with you separately. But thank you. I think given the clean identification, there's a lot of potential in which this paper can go.
Thank you, Minnie. Can we now have some questions? Is there any? None? Okay, then can Office please respond to Minnie's comment?
I can respond to a comment.
Sure.
Thank you, Mary, for this comment. Definitely, if we look forward this figure, because initially our idea was to make a short paper and we just confined ourselves to very important part of the paper and just commit the further detail. Of course, the idea that comes into our mind that the other, just like the track model and the other such asset transfer, they have like consumption support along with the asset transfer. So the one of the finding from the study that they might use that asset for the consumption thing. But for this particular case, but we assume that they are like getting this support of the last 1 decade, so probably they are well integrated with the economic system. And later to that, when we talk about the bundle of intervention, of course there were a bundle of intervention like the interest-free loan and other training component, but we restricted ourselves to only those CAPRA sample for the beneficiary, those only have asset transfer. For other component like interest-free loan, the cutoff would be relatively high from let it be around 21, and for the long-term support it would be at 24, and for the loan it would be around 40. So they have a different packages, and for everyone they have a different criteria. Yes, we also like surprised by the finding where we didn't find any impact on the large element, because one of the key transfer is the large animal, and our further work basically will expand and try to understand why this is happening. Is there any liquidation of those animals, or they are substituting with the small animal, because maybe the small animal would give a quick return. And now we are conducting some sort of like a qualitative survey just to strengthen this finding and see what went wrong with the large animal and what happened with them. So we did like a qualitative survey with around 150 or so. We just completed that survey and try to complement the finding with this. I'll stop it and maybe we can have another. Thank you.